Hello and welcome to the Stockout. We are filming live. We're doing it live today in Atlanta at the Future of Supply Chain. I am one of your hosts, Mike Bowdendistel, joined by Grace Sharkey. Grace, good to see you in person.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, good to see you in person too. Happy to be together again. It's gonna be a good time.
Yeah, much more fun than doing this in front of a computer monitor, which is how we usually do it.
Exactly.
And we're going to have a good guest today. We're going to have Zach Jecklin, who's the Chief Information Officer at Echo Global Logistics. But so far, I mean, what are your impressions of the conference? Have you seen any things that stood out, or just interesting, takeaways, or just themes of the conference so far?
Yeah, for me, I've been spending a lot of time talking to a lot of the companies and people in the technology space, and I think I'm getting really excited because I'm seeing more customizable tools, right? I think people are really starting to understand it's not just about this giant legacy TMS, but like what you can integrate into it and the partnerships and the long-term development that comes, I think, with some of these really great technology providers. So just in terms of, a lot of what I cover here at FreightWaves, I'm getting really excited because I think that's starting to click with our industry, that it's the technology aspect thing, right? We all understand it's there, but how can we build these big partnerships to really actually bring a solution?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of investment in those areas. I mean, one of the speakers, I think it was with the speaker from JB Hunt,
Yes.
said that they're really seeing a lot of investment and continued investment in those technology services. I think they said that 80 or 90% are at least going to invest just as much as they had been, if not more,
Yeah.
in the future.
Well, and it's interesting. Sometimes I get like press releases or information, as just news for everyone out there too, and it doesn't explain the true problem that you're solving, right? Like maybe what the product is doing, but like what's the initial problem? And I think hearing more from shippers, that's what they're looking for in those conversations. It's not just like, okay, don't sell me the solution, but let's talk about my problem and how exactly we're going to take even the change management, right, to make sure this technology improves us and takes us a little bit more into the future as a shipper too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what we do in Sonar, is we really have to get to know
Yeah.
the customer, understand what their needs are, and then package the data in such a way
Yeah.
that it's really helpful to them. But yeah, the more you get to know the customer, the better. I would say that one of the other themes that came up for me, just from listening to some of these presentations and speaking with people, is just the whole concept of mitigating risk.
Yes.
Is particularly from the shipper's perspective, we've been in this freight recession for call it 25 months, 27 months, longer than you typically have. I mean, typically it would be a year and a half, and then the market would be tight again. But that hasn't happened as quickly, this time around. And so we've heard that from UPS, from JB Hunt earlier today, from a few different companies, that that's really what shippers are looking for at this stage in time. Is it just so these freight markets can change very quickly.
Yeah.
We've seen that even in the past few weeks on the ocean market, just how quickly the ocean rates can move up and how quickly you can have a ocean going container shortage, which that was not a problem that anyone was thinking about just a couple months ago.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's preparing ourselves for the risk that we know is to come, right? These black swan events, and I don't think clearly, hopefully we don't see the COVID situation happen again, but to almost be prepared to pivot, right, when you need to. And I think even in the risk side too, like some of the technology in here is about like showcasing it's almost like the regulations that are to come and the risks there. I get really excited hearing companies talk about diminished issues, and as we see e-commerce grow, how are we making sure we're acknowledging a lot of the regulation? I think we're going to see more and more of from the government too. So yeah, there's so many different sides of that risk management aspect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another one is tariffs.
Yes.
Is we're getting to be more and more protectionistic. The Biden administration is protectionistic. Yes. Trump may even be more protectionistic. And some of what we heard this morning is some companies are just saying, well, there's so much uncertainty, we're not going to do anything, we're just going to wait.
Yeah.
Well, there's a risk in that too.
Yes.
If you don't import. I mean, another way to potentially mitigate some of that risk is just try to get things onshore earlier to avoid some of those tariffs. That's what we saw when there were tariffs the last round of them. But it's then you could maybe be stuck with too much inventory. So either way, you're taking a risk.
Exactly. Like, how do you measure that? How do you make sure that you have enough here, but you don't get yourself stuck in that situation where you're trying to deal with that high inventory over 2 or 3 years? So it's interesting, and it's just day one, right? So we got a lot more areas to cover tomorrow too.
Yeah, exactly. And even, another theme is still the environmental aspect, which
True.
which that really doesn't seem to have been diminished as much as maybe you would think it would be. I mean, like the dynamic between rail and intermodal in sort of the eastern part of the country, you're not saving a lot by using intermodal for the most part, but that comment this morning about how the carbon emissions is 65% less on intermodal. I was thinking it's more like 50% less because that's how much you think of the intermodal fuel surcharge is less. But there's still a lot of focus on those emissions goals, particularly from the big shippers, the big CPG companies.
Yeah, and I think it's about being creative too on the sustainability side. There's an investor the other day that was saying they almost always put electric vehicles right before autonomous vehicles, and they think that's switching more too. Because I think on the sustainability side, of course, electric vehicle is something to look at, but how can we make sure that we're filling that truck with as much as possible, routing it as best as possible, saving time inside? Talk about yard management systems, right? Doing those turnarounds, working with trailer pools, and just finding ways. I was just talking with someone. I think right for every one truck, there's four to six trailers. With that stat, that doesn't make sense why a driver is spending more than 20 minutes getting
Right.
in and
Yeah.
out.
You just drop and hook. Yeah.
Exactly. So I love that, like a sustainability emissions kind of question, or how do we fix this? And it's, the electric vehicle is probably the last thing that we could initiate today, right? That could bring that turnaround too and eliminate more waste.
And any other takeaways? You spoke with a lot of investors
Yes.
recently. Like, what are the investors thinking about in this market? Like, what are they interested in? What types of investments are they trying to make?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of it is, of course, AI. That buzzword is a big one. I think that's huge. But someone had mentioned like they don't want to hear about visibility anymore on what the truck. It's, I think, more about how are we taking the data and using AI tools to actually give us an actionable result. There's a company called PackSafe who they have a tool called Athena, and it's really interesting. They take a bunch of data in and talk about risk management too. It'll come out and say, hey, this lane on Thursdays past 4 p.m. usually gets you in trouble. Like that kind of stuff is actionable. Now I can actually figure out, and it'll even tell you what you should probably do instead. And so I think that's what's interesting to me is like, how can we start to use all this data that we're collecting, that we've been talking about for years now, and make it easier for someone who's been in the industry for 20 years, but also someone who's been in it for 4 months to quickly make those adjustments.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that flows really well into
True.
today's guest, who is the Chief Information Officer at Echo Global Logistics, Zach Jecklin. Zach, thank you for joining us on the Stockout.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So what brings you here today? What are you looking most forward to hearing, talking with companies? What's your goal when you walk into this building?
Yeah, you talked about all the investment in technology that's happening in the space. It's been going on for a long time. That's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the FreightWaves conferences. It's probably I don't know how many it is, 15th, 20th at this point. And that's what I always feel like I come away with, is a good understanding of what some of the competitors are doing, what new vendors are out there that Echo could partner with. We've been a proprietary tech shop since day one, but that doesn't mean that we build everything. We like to buy and partner with great vendors that are coming out with new technology.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about that proprietary technology. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how that was built over the years and what differentiates it with the versus the other 3PLs?
How long do I have?
16 minutes.
That's a hard one to answer quickly, but I'll touch on it. So Echo, we were founded in 2005. We were founded from day one as building our own proprietary transportation management system, or TMS. And what I think differentiates it across other competitors that have built their own and off-the-shelf, companies that provide technology to the long-tail brokers out there is a few things. And so I'll start by saying, for one, it's multimodal across many, many modes. It handles truckload and LTL, partials, intermodal, expedite, small parcel, you name it, we can move it within our platform. And that's very meaningful when you think about the different types of shippers of all sizes that Echo works with. They want generally a one-stop shop to be able to operate a multimodal shipping pattern. And number two, I would say, is the fact that our managed transportation product, which is about $1 billion business at Echo, is built into the same technology as the brokerage, means that for us to do business with a shipper as a brokerage client and have them transition to a managed transportation client is a very seamless task. And we see that our biggest entry point for new managed trans business are current brokerage customers. Over 50% of our managed trans wins comes from a current brokerage client where we might move, 20 loads a day and we go to 100 loads a day because we're taking on all the freight with a new contract. So I'd say that the multimodal approach and the approach to have brokerage and managed trans in one platform is unique for Echo.
Yeah.
I'd say number two is the data science that we've invested in over the years. I think we hired our first data scientist, who's here today, Scott Friesen, almost 8 years ago. And so we got off to an early start. We now have a team of 15 to 20 strong data scientists and strong analysts that are putting out new features and functionality that we've embedded in these tools in a really unique way. And I think that in a lot of ways, the way that we've embedded those technologies is the secret sauce.
Yeah.
You could go to all of our competitors that are big, and they would all have some amount of data science within their platform. But it's truly unique when you think about the life cycle of a load, of all that happens from order to cash, how many different minute details there are in tasks that are happening. And when you are building your own technology, you're able to embed data science and differentiation into each one of those unique tasks.
Yeah.
There might be hundreds of tasks over the life cycle of a load. And so we feel like it's focusing on those details that really drives the value for Echo.
It's interesting. I think a lot of companies are looking to mirror that, right, and start to transition into that maybe more the tech-enabled space of brokerage. And of course, the history of Echo. I'm interested in what's it been for you building that team. Like, you touch on these small points that actually make this technology work. So you have to balance, of course, I'm sure, experts that maybe are a little bit more Silicon Valley-esque with people who've probably been in freight. What's it like for you building that and making sure you're keeping that balance?
Yeah, the partnership between the business at Echo and the technology team, I think is one of the strongest partnerships that you could possibly want as a technology leader. We've focused over the years on our tagline is technology at your fingertips, experts by your side.
Love that.
And that has been our tagline for some time now. We're not building technology to replace all the humans.
Yeah.
We know that there's more to this business and more to brokerage than just automating every single task. That's not the way to run a profitable, successful, growing brokerage business, as I think we've all come to realize at this point. And so the combination of those two things, the people and the tech, is what matters. And so in anything that we're building, we're focusing on the change management, the adoption, the trust in the technology. I mean, you think about hiring a data scientist 7 or 8 years ago and getting them, the capabilities to predict a truckload cost on any given lane. And then you take a bunch of old school brokers that have been doing it for decades and get them to trust that. That was a process. It didn't just happen overnight. But I think Echo's acknowledgement that it is a journey and it is an evolution, and the progress we've made over the last 2 decades in building the technology from the ground up that's again the differentiation, I think, in the way that we've done it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting how you describe having those customers go from the transactional model to the managed transportation model, and what are they looking for on the managed transportation side at this point? I mean, the market's been weak for a couple of years. What issues are they going to you to solve to maintain their supply chain?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. When the market softens, it's generally when we see the biggest uptick in our managed transportation new business. 2023 was the absolute record year for new business that we've sold for managed trans at Echo, and it's because of shippers' challenges that they had in 2021 and 2022. And so coming out of the challenges that they faced, they look for other alternatives. And in a lot of cases, Echo, through managed transportation, can be that alternative where we're basically offering a fully outsourced transportation management solution where we'll come in, we'll look at all of their supply chain, we'll look at where they have their warehouses, we'll look at the network that they're utilizing today, and we'll leverage the 100 plus LTL carriers that we have great partnerships and great relationships with, and we leverage the 50,000 plus truckload carriers that we do business with to create a great solution for them that generally, almost all cases, saves them money and takes a lot of the burden of actually managing the freight off their plate, because we have a team of experts that we insert into the business and they start running the transportation.
The mode aspect is interesting to me because they talk about, especially shippers who might be just used to doing full truckload and things of that nature. How do you work with them to discover those modes? And is there any modes in particular you think that if there's shippers out there today should really deeply consider and look into more?
It's a great question. I think that I think Echo might have coined the term 10 plus years ago of this partial mode that we offer. And it really is the freight that sits in between what an LTL would be or what a truckload would be. A lot of the LTL carriers will call it volume LTL, but we've leveraged a lot of our truckload relationships and carriers that want to run this partial business for us to implement a pretty unique offering for shippers that they're not always aware of that exists. And so being able to leverage that across our shipper platform, I think, is pretty unique. The other thing I would say about the multimodal approach is one of the, again, differentiators of Echo is we build technology that suits all size shippers and carriers. And so when you think about our top customers are, of course, the Fortune 100 shippers, and our top carriers in a lot of ways are the nationals, but a very large portion of overall freight spend might be small to mid-sized businesses on the shipper side and might be the middle market or owner-operators on the carrier side. And that's unique because in a lot of ways, those different size carriers and shippers need different types of technology. And so if you're going to build it, it requires additional resources, it requires additional time to build those types of technology offerings. But we've taken our time to make sure that we get that right. And through that, we end up with very multimodal shippers. Because the mid-market has lots of truckload, and they also have a lot of LTL because they might not have the relationships with those large national players to be able to get rates that Echo could get. When we think about the Fortune 50 or Fortune 100, that's not a strong LTL shipper for us because in a lot of ways they could go and develop those relationships on their own. But the mid-market and down is a huge advantage on the LTL side for a company like Echo to do business with.
Yeah, I mean, it really strikes me that you're well positioned to serve the CPG companies that are starting up. I mean, I guess there's relatively few barriers to entry. If someone wants to start a CPG brand, they sort of get a recipe and they have some outsourced manufacturing, do that, and they can leverage your LTL network and then eventually sort of grow with you to the truckload side of things. For some of the larger shippers, they care about quantifying their carbon footprint, and how do you do that with the data that you have? Is there a way that you do that?
Yeah, so we've put out an ESG report for the last few years, so we're trying to stay ahead of that in terms of the different initiatives that are happening within Echo, both from a carbon footprint standpoint and sustainability. And we're starting to see shippers care about it. To some degree.
Yes.
To some degree. But we want to make sure that we're ahead of the game there. So we offer reporting. It's difficult because of us as a broker. We don't own the assets. So it's a little difficult for us to know and understand the exact carbon footprint of all of the carriers that we're doing business with. But we try our best to understand the types of equipment that are being used, make some assumptions, of course, around the carbon footprint there. And leverage high-quality carriers at the end of the day that are going to provide great service to our shippers. That's really first and foremost what we're trying to do is, we take complete ownership in the finding the right carrier for the right piece of freight, and we want our shippers to think of Echo as the carrier and not be concerned with what carrier we've actually had haul the load, because if it meets our standards, we want them to feel like it would meet theirs.
Yeah, on that note, and we talked about risk management earlier too. I mean, that's, I think, a big one, because just in terms of what might need to be reported at some point in time, to know your partner's already thinking ahead of before that happens. But also, we deal with a lot of fraud and issues like that in this space. How have you worked that technology and to make sure that that's being watched as well?
Yeah, through a number of different channels, and it's not just technology at the end of the day. These fraudsters are very creative.
So smart.
And every time you
Start a real business.
yeah, every time you plug one hole, there's they've come up with some new way of trying to target it. And so we've really taken a multi-prong approach. We've created multi-factor authentication, of course, for our internal applications that our carriers would use to try to create a barrier of entry for a bad actor to get access into our carrier platform. That's proved to be very, very effective in terms of stopping someone that might have obtained a credential off the dark web, you name it. That multi-factor authentication stops them at the door there. But shippers or carriers have been bad actors, have been creative in terms of getting access in other ways than that.
Yeah.
And so we've gone so far as to implement checks and balances with people, with facilities that we move high volumes of freight with, to make sure that the carrier that we've said is going to show up is the truck that's actually pulling up and hitting the dock. And then the final piece is there are, back to third parties out there, there's a lot of really powerful tools now that have gone deep into understanding and putting an emphasis on fraud control within the carrier universe. And so we've partnered with a number of them as well to try to add into our own database.
Love that.
Are there any areas within data that shippers are having a hard time with in terms of visibility? Like sometimes I hear that they know what container ship their cargo is on. They just don't know how long those containers sit at the port of LA. Like, are there areas like that that are just lack of visibility that Echo can shed a light on?
I can't speak as much to the international. It's a pretty small portion of what Echo does in terms of moving freight over the ocean. But I can say this, there's always gaps in the data that you're obtaining from either a trucking carrier or visibility, right? Not every carrier are going to have complete electronic tracking. What I think Echo's done a really nice job of is we've utilized even the data science team to go so far as to say, we're moving tens of thousands of shipments a day. We've experienced all of these cases at some point, right? A carrier that fell behind, said they were going to be on time, didn't make it. And so for us, it's about utilizing our data science and AI to start predicting when there's going to be a problem and be proactive with shippers about that. Because even though the data might not be, we might not have the actual data that says the freight's going to be late, but we can predict that it's going to be late based on what we have and based on similar lanes or freight or customer experiences that we've seen over the last decade.
Yeah. Well, the best thing about this segment right here is right after this, we have the good old DAT sonar debate coming up. And we're going to be talking, of course, markets and all those things. I'm interested from your perspective and what you're seeing so far. What are you seeing from shippers today? What's the market looking like from Echo's perspective? And any thoughts of maybe projections of a little bit nicer market for the carriers working with Echo as well?
I've been in this business for 16 years now, so I know better than to try to predict exactly when this ends. Look, you said it earlier in the show, 25 months or so of this declining or flat kind of at the bottom freight environment. And I think back to what's pushed the environment over the edge and pushed it back into an increasing cyclical point in the past. And it's usually some catalyst. So you get to this point in the cycle and you kind of hover for a while, and then there's a catalyst that pushes it over. In 2014, it was Snowmageddon. In 2017, it was ELDs and some hurricanes. 2020, it was COVID. And so I don't want to say that we have to wait until there's a catalyst like that before we're going to see a good environment, because at some point, the supply and demand curve will finally tick in a different direction and we'll push it over. We just haven't had to wait for it to happen on its own for quite some time because of those catalysts. So I think we'll see. I think one of Echo's strengths in the space is that we do have very experienced people that know how to drive profitable growth in any type of environment. And so we certainly prefer the hot freight market, but we know that we can take market share and we can be very competitive in the space, even in the downturn. And so we just continue to execute, add value to shippers and carriers, and we know at some point it'll change, and
Yeah.
we'll take advantage of that too.
Just a little acts of God. That could be helpful, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with the hurricane, the potential for hurricanes
Yeah.
with the water being as hot as it's ever been, like
Yeah.
it's the speculation that we're going to have a strong hurricane season, but
Yes, that is true. Yeah.
we don't think people want that necessarily. Other than
I'm not gonna root
is
for
a-
the national.
Yeah, it
natural
is like a
disaster.
weird industry to be like, if we could just have a snowmageddon again, it could all change. Let's see what we got. Running out of time here. If people watching want to reach out to Echo, best way to do that?
Yeah, echo.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out. For shippers and carriers, we would love to add you to the Rolodex. Provide great service.
Love it. For everyone, of course, here and watching, we're going to have, again, the big DAT sonar debate here coming up shortly. So that should be fun. But for everyone as well, we want you to join the Stockout community. So head to FreightWaves.com, click on newsletters, join the Stockout so we can get some wonderful feedback from retailers and CPG companies for you all. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes.